Hey there folks. So in our last video we looked at how to add specific notifies to our animations and our effects to get an event or an effect to happen at a particular time. And one of the things that we noticed was that in these ZD sources we can add in notifies for things like Niagara effects, particles, sound, but they're not very reusable. And also, if I want to have maybe an attack effect that plays a Niagara effect and plays a sound and fires a projectile and does some other effects and things onto the world around it, it's going to be much harder to do that when we're having to do lots and lots of notifies inside of here. So now what we can do is we can say, okay, well, I'm going to do an attack, and you can see the primary attack runs at that point. Same with the secondary attack with a projectile. But how do I get that to start now doing my attack at the point of that kind of slam that happens down onto the actual kind of floor? I want to have it so that the damage is applied to that location. Now, what I could do is I could go into my window here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate these off just for now. And so I've got this primary attack effect and I've got the secondary attack effect, and I could start debugging and thinking about the approaches for this. So one of the things that I like to do is go draw debug. And if you do draw a debug, what you're going to find is a whole bunch of different kind of shapes, lines, options that we can do to just debug positions and directions and things like that in space. So I might want to go for a box. I think I'm going to go for a draw debug sphere, and that's probably going to match up with the trace effect that I'm going to do to try and find things that I can damage. And I'm just going to plug this in. And it says, okay, well, what was the center of this? So for now, let's say get actor location. I'm not going to go for the specific claw, and like with a 3D character, I can get the bone name, the position of that bone for maybe the right hand, the left hand, or wherever that is if I'm doing a punch. But for now, let's plug this in and we'll use this to work out where this is going to appear. Now, how long is this going to appear for? Well, let's make it last for half a second. Maybe make it a little bit thicker so we can actually see it. And white should show up because I've got a nice black character. And we'll leave it at 100 and we'll just see what that looks like. So we press and you can see that the effect happens. 100 is a pretty good number. It does the damage, or it does the check around it for things that maybe could take damage. But it does it exactly where my character is. So what I need to look at now is how can I take, rather than the character's position and have that trace appear around them, but instead use the position of the claw as it slams down into the floor. So how do we actually do that? And if we were working with a 3D character, one of the things that we would be able to do, for example, if we wanted to attach a weapon to the character's hand, or we wanted to have a location for a fireball to come out, we would want it to come from the character's hand again. Well, how do we do that on this? Because if we go through all of these animations here, there's no option, there's no thing inside of the ZD source for us to specifically target a point on here to tell this secondary attack. And you can see the notify runs, but unlike the Niagara one and the sound one, there's no offset value for us here. So what about if I go and have a look inside of the animations themselves, inside of the flipbook? So let's go and have a look at our stomp. And I open that out and you can see we have the materials, the collisions, I have all of the different sprites that play, but inside of these, all we're deciding is which sprite and for how many frames they play. So there's nothing really in here for me to be able to say at this particular point when the stomp happens on this frame here, this is when I want the positional effect to happen. So what I need to do is I need to go another step back, and that next step back, well, that is going all the way to the sprites. And let's go and have a look at our swipe stomp. Now, if we're looking at this, one of the things, it makes it really easy having them all laid out here, but if you need to, one of the things I would recommend that you do is go and have a look through in your flipbook and scroll through and find the particular animation that you are looking for. So in my case, I'd be looking for the one where the claw itself goes down. What is the animation that is playing at this point? And then you can go find that. Now, as I said, really easy when I've got such big icons, and you can use control and middle mouse scroll wheel to zoom in and out if that helps you. And I zoom in and I can see, well, this is obvious. Like these ones are bringing up the claw. This is when it descends down. This is when I need to have that attack positioning actually be triggered. So if I open up this, and one of the things that you'll see is we've got all of the things that we've worked on before, the materials, the source textures, UVs, pivots and such. But I've also got this sockets option. And sockets, I can add an array, add to the array of sockets, and I can basically define, if we go into here, a specific transform. And notice this is a local transform. So this is essentially an offset from the position it's currently in. Where should this thing appear? Location, rotation, and scale. And also a name. Now for this, what you could do is you could say primary attack or slam location, stomp location. Yeah, and that would be perfectly fine. Yeah, I could say stomp location, put that into this logic and say when he stomps, find the stomp location. But again, let's start thinking about this in a kind of very modular way. What about if I wanted to have functionality that allows my character to change and to develop, to go through different phases or stages of their abilities and effects? What about if I've just got, firing a fireball on one, but swinging a sword or stomping on another? In those instances, rather than saying stomp location, fire location, and so on, it might just be easier to just go with attack location or attack lock, simplifying it as much as possible. And when I'm looking for the socket name, the logic for this, I would just literally be looking for that name. Doesn't matter what animation I'm in, I could look and say, does this socket exist inside of there? Now with that, when I've added it, you can see now we have this little location, and it'll say where would you like to put this. Well, let's go with the location, and I'm just going to drag this over, and we probably want to be around here. This is where that claw has just come down and slammed into the floor, and I like to keep them a little bit rounded off, so maybe 40, 41 in this instance, and you can see that works perfectly. I can also go up. You can see it's not going up on there because that's bringing it closer or further away. So remember our 2D kind of element to this. So I can go up as well, and it depends on how you want this to be placed out. Now I'm obviously going to do this with a sphere, and the idea with this is that this will be the central point of the sphere, and it'll create a sphere around this. This is where my hit's going to take place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the attack location, which is now going to be at this offset, and that's going to be the location I use for doing that debug line or that debug sphere. Now let's just, before we go back and add that functionality, just jump back to the Flipbook. And what you'll notice is the Flipbook now has that attack location socket actually added to it. But even better than that, one of the things that you notice is that actually it exists there the whole time. So essentially, if I add in a sprite into a Flipbook that has a socket on it, the whole Flipbook has that socket for the whole duration. And all that's happening is on that particular frame, so you can see there, it moves to a specific location. Now that's great for the thing that we're doing here, because it means that we're not necessarily going to have a problem where it maybe tries to get the socket and it hasn't hit that frame, and maybe it's not finding it, because obviously it'll find it and it'll be in the middle of the character, it'll be in the wrong place. It means that we could go back and we could go into other frames like these ones, and we could add it into the correct place if we want to just make sure that we're covering ourselves. Maybe it's happening a frame too early or too late with our logic. Or you could use this for all sorts of other things. So for example, maybe attaching a weapon or a piece of equipment to your character. Maybe it's a piece of armor or a piece of clothing. Yeah, you want to have your character have a backpack or a hat or something that is attached to their sprite. Rather than going and drawing it onto them and having to have another whole set of artwork, and think about it with 2D, that means that every single animation is going to need to have that done. Instead, what we could do is we could go through and set the attachment point. And every single sprite frame, we could just go through and change where that's going to be. So yeah, you can see that that's there. And now we can see that when that comes down, that is exactly where that's going to be slamming down for us. So let's go back over to our actual logic here. And one of the things that I can now start looking at doing is getting that socket and using it to find the location for where this attack should happen from. Okay, so I'm back inside of this widow character now, and if I test this, obviously you can see that the debug sphere that we're drawing there goes into the middle of our character. So what I want to do now is, rather than saying let's get the location for the whole actor, I want to target a very specific point. I want to get that socket. Now, where does that socket exist in terms of all the stuff that's here? Well, it exists here inside of this sprite, and annoyingly, this is something that does bother me, but sprite, it's called sprite, it's not a sprite. It is a Flipbook component, so obviously you've got to keep that in mind, that this is the whole Flipbook that is playing for your character. And if we drag this in, what we can now do is drag off of here to get information about this specific flipbook. So for example, what flipbook is currently being played, but also data from inside of those. So if I type in socket, you can see that we can do stuff like, does socket exist? So I could type in a particular name. So for example, attack lock, I could put that in, and then I could use this to basically check and see whether it exists. You know, that could be useful if you're unsure, if you're trying to debug and you don't know why it's not running. You could just see whether the socket is actually existing. We could also get all of the socket names. So you could use this and use a for each loop to just loop through each of those, and each of these that prints out would be a name. But also you could just get the length of these just to see how many sockets do we have on our character. Again, useful for debugging, useful for finding out specific things. Maybe we want to get all of the sockets that exist, and for each one of them create something or do an operation on them. But what else have we got? Well, the bottom ones, get socket location, get socket rotation, and get socket transform. And obviously transform is going to be our location, rotation, and scale. Now I only need the location. I only need to know where does this socket exist. And you can see it's saying which socket specifically. Well, you could promote this to a variable, and you could keep on obviously using that. And that would be a much more obviously modular and reusable way to do that, because then in each of these characters that inherits from this, or maybe particular characters might have data assets that you use and you define where their attack location name is going to be. But for this one, I've just typed in that, and instead of using this location, I could use the sockets location. Now I'm just going to reduce down the size of this a little bit, only because it is a very big sphere. And what we should now see is if we test this out, there you go. The slam effect happens on the floor exactly where this is going. So we can see my character, if I move along and then slam down, you can see there, he slams down on the floor, and the attack effect is happening exactly where the claw hits. So what if we want to use this for our other animations? Obviously, we've seen we can use it here for doing the slam attack down onto the floor. I could also go into my spit attack, and I could use this to guide exactly where this spit effect is going to come from. So we've used the notify to make sure that we spit at this point in the animation. And if you're unsure, obviously you can go and watch your animation effects. You can mess around with the different animations of those, look in the source for it. But I want to go into here, and the same thing again. I want to create myself a socket. I'm going to give it the same socket name, so attack lock, and I'm going to use a offset here to define where should this be created. And remember, we're going to have a capsule that's probably going to collide with our different kind of projectiles and things that are being created. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to drag this over to here and maybe put it over here, and this is where I want this projectile to be created from. Yeah, I'm going to average this out, make it 20 and maybe 35. Now this is something I can obviously tweak. I can make it spawn a little bit over, and if I need to, if maybe I'm finding that my projectiles are too big, they're colliding with this character when they're being created, this is one of those things you could just come in 36, 37, you can just keep on moving it a couple of units over. Something to look at this would be the radius of the projectile that you're creating. If obviously it's got a really big projectile radius, it might be that it's being created here, but it's too wide and it's colliding with your capsule. Maybe that's what's destroying it when it's being hit. So I'm going to be creating very small projectiles for this little 2D game. So I'm going to make a little kind of slight offset here, and I'm just going to have the projectile appear here. Don't really need to be creating it from my character, because it's just going to happen in this one frame. It's just going to appear here with this effect and then move along. Now that's using that attack location name. So I could do the exact same thing that I've done here. I'm just going to take these 3 nodes and I'm going to copy and paste them. I'm going to bring them down here and use them on my secondary, which we know is firing. And I'm going to do the exact same thing where I create this and use that location to determine where this shoots from. So let's have a look. He shoots, and there you go. As he moves forward, that is where the projectile is going to be created. And you can see that he starts his animation, but he doesn't do the effect until obviously the notify runs. So that gives us a lot of control now to start saying, well, let's fire projectiles, let's do slow attacks, and let's start doing some very specific things with these notifies and with these sockets. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.